All right, welcome everyone to the Learning Ritual Fast Start class. And today I have a few goals in the next hour and a half for you and what I want to promise that I'm going to deliver to you. I'm going to show you how you can find time in your schedule, overcome information overwhelm with all the different information sources from podcasts to videos to articles to books. How do we find the gems in there? How do we retain and apply what we learn rather than just forgetting it? And then finally, and most importantly, how do we actually get results from our learning rather than just, how do we get results from it rather than just doing it but not getting any value in our life beyond enjoyment? Enjoyment is great, but we want to get both. And the way you can look at this Fast Start Masterclass is as the 80-20. So you've probably heard about the 80-20 rule, that in a lot of domains, especially with learning, 20% of the information creates 80% of the results. And there's a lot of people don't know that in domains where the 80-20 rule applies, it's actually fractal. So there's actually 4% of the inputs can lead to 64% of the outputs, and 1% about can lead to 50% of the outputs. So on this call, on this webinar, I really tried to narrow down over 40 lessons and tons of Q&As that we've done into the core things that you can apply right away and get a result with. So before we jump in though, I've delivered this presentation and we're prepared for it and practiced it to give you the full value today. And in order for you to get the value, I ask that you do a few different things. If you're like me, you probably have a lot of browser windows open most of the time. So I invite you to close those windows. And secondly, it's shown that even having your phone near you, even if it's off, it can be a distraction. So I invite you to even hide your phone, put it in a different room, put it on airplane mode, close the door if you're in the office, get a cup of coffee. And I'm going to ask you to do a few exercises. So I invite you to participate and take advantage of those. You're already here. 80% of success, they say, is showing up. So the other 20% is actually being fully engaged. So if that sounds good to you, can you type yes in the chat? Dieter, Stephen, Vladimir, Jacob, Ian, everyone else here as well. Let me know you're here. I just lost the chat. There we go. Good. Ian says, "It got my water. Let's go." Dieter says, yes. Orn says, yes as well. All right. Thank you. Let's do it then, guys. So first, I want to present a model to you it's one of the core models of learning just in general, and especially in the Learning Ritual course. It's helpful. This is really important because it helps us go beyond hacks of, let's say, the latest memorization technique or latest speed reading technique, and really think about what learning is and how does learning happen so that we can speed it up and increase the quality. And so, for basically any learning model, whether it's an algorithm, an artificial intelligence, or a bunny rabbit, or us as humans, it goes through there's this 4-step loop that happens over and over. So one is the organization, or it could be an organization, or the individual, or the algorithm takes in information. So for us, we take in information through all our 5 senses. And then the next step is we process that information. And so for us, we have our brain. For artificial intelligence, it's algorithms. And then we take that information that we've processed, and we do the 3rd step is we experiment. We act in the real world. Maybe we form hypotheses about what might happen, and then we take action. And then once we take action, we get a result of feedback. And sometimes we get high quality feedback. Sometimes there's a delay. Sometimes we only get certain feedback, but there's blind spots in other areas. And once we get feedback, we can take what we learned and then say, okay, based on what I've learned about this loop, I'm going to get information differently the next time, or I'm going to change my algorithm, or I'm going to improve my experimentation process. And although this is two-dimensional in this image, it's really a three-dimensional process where you have this loop that keeps on going around. And as you learn how to learn better, that loop goes faster and it's higher quality, and you can drastically increase your learning rate. And so now that we have that model, the second thing I want to share with you that's a key to really process is everything in this course can be narrowed down to these two variables in this formula, that professional success over time equals learning time that we put in, and then times our learning rate. So you can almost think about this like a compound interest formula, like a simple compound interest formula, where if you put money in a bank, that's your principal, and that's the equivalent to the learning time here. And then the learning rate is the interest you earn on that money. So the more that you maximize these two variables and then do it over time, the more that your learning compounds, similar to the compound interest formula. I made it simpler here, so it's not the compound interest formula, but it's the same idea. And this formula is really what inspires me day to day in having my own learning ritual, because I'm always thinking about, once you have a piece of knowledge, you can use it over and over. So once you learn how to read, then you could all of a sudden, you've probably used that skill, dozens or if not hundreds of times a day. Once you learn how to learn, you can apply that every time you're learning something new. And so I think about how that knowledge compounds in my life, and that's what inspires me. And compound interest is really, really interesting because it's so counterintuitive. In the beginning of any compound interest formula, you don't really see much results. It kind of feels like just any linear growth process. I remember the first time I set up a bank account, and when my mom set it up for me, and she would show me these interests that I was getting every month. I think I had like $100. This was first grade. And I don't know what the interest was, but let's just say 5%. So every month I would get a statement and I would see that, and it was just not really inspiring to see just not that much money, cents or dollars. And what a lot of people get is how counterintuitive the end of the process is. So when you think about Warren Buffett, when he was just 50 years old, he had close to $1 billion in net worth. So he crossed it around, I think he was around 54, 55 years old. And today he has over $81 billion. So from a financial perspective, in many ways, when he was already 50 years old, even though we think about that as midlife or even the end of your career, he literally was just getting started. It's crazy to think about it. And so when you think about yourself in learning years, if you're on this call and you're 30, 40, 50, even 60 years old, if you think about your learning as a compounding process, you're just getting started. And this is what most people miss about learning. They put in the time on a day or a week, and they don't invest in the long term. They kind of just take the money out, and they do the equivalent of putting money in a bank, letting it earn interest, and being like, oh, this is not making much money, I'm just going to do it otherwise. And they don't let the process play out. And just as having a slightly different compounding rate for money can make a really big difference over time, having an improved learning rate can make a really big difference. And this chart just shows how a 5% versus 10%, even though it's only double the interest rate, over time, it's over 10x the difference, or nearly 10x the difference. And then this kind of goes to the Warren Buffett aspect of, if you had, let's just say, two people, you started out with a certain amount of money, and then you let it compound over time. One person takes it out after 45 years. The other person takes it out after 50 years. Even though the person with 50 years just put it in 5 years longer, they have almost 500,000 more in this model. So what this means is, what you want to do, I call this the magic number, is when you're thinking about learning time and you're thinking about, at the end of the day, you're really tired, you've put in work, you put the kids to sleep, it's really easy to just zone out and say, well, I could spend 15 minutes here, or I could spend 20 minutes on my commute every day, but that wouldn't really make much of a difference. I'm not going to do it. And if you take into account compound interest and compound time, then even that 20 minutes is going to compound for your whole life. And so it's hugely important. And so what I do is I multiply it. I assume I'm going to be using this knowledge for the rest of my life. So let's say 50 years, just assuming 10% interest. It's hard to really know what the learning rate actually is, but just it's good as a substitute. And so whenever there's, let's say, an hour of time, I think about that as 117 hours because I multiply it by 117. So it's equivalent of like 3 work weeks of learning. So I got this from Warren Buffett, where his whole life, when most people get wealthier and more money, they drastically increase their spending. And Warren Buffett had his same car for many, many years. It's a basic car that anybody middle class could afford. He's lived in the same house since he was 29 years old. And, he buys breakfast at McDonald's every day. So he keeps his expenses really low so that he can really compound that money. And the reason he does that is because whenever he looks at $1, he could say, well, I could buy this more expensive car, but if I just hold it in the bank account, it's going to compound over time, multiply by, he doesn't actually do 117, but he does. He multiplies it in his head and thinks about what is going to be valuable in the future, and he becomes frugal. Cool. Yep. Thank you, Ian. It's a powerful reframe. Looking through the comments here. So Ben Franklin, he says, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. So with what we've just talked about, you can understand what he's saying there. So now we have the frame. We have the magic number of 117. And the big levers are learning time times learning rate. And for the rest of the Fast Start Masterclass today, I'm going to dive into both of these and give you specific hacks and frameworks so you can get the most of it. So let's dive into people's first challenge, is finding the time for learning. So in the course, we're going to talk about lots of different ways to do it. For the purposes of today, I'm going to focus on double time, this concept of double time. Double time is essentially doing 2 things at once. So it's doing a commute and then listening to an audiobook. It's doing your chores, listening to an audiobook. It's transforming just a normal conversation or that you'd have with someone catching up and thinking about, okay, how could I transform this into a learning conversation? And the beautiful thing about double time is that you don't have to give up anything. You're doing the things you'd already do, and you're just doing them differently. You're adding something on or transforming the activity. And the other thing that's beautiful is that it's really in the past 10 years that we have this incredible device in our pocket called a smartphone, where you can access the best of humanity's knowledge through your ears at an incredibly low price. So we have podcasts, which are free, which is just crazy. And you have a lot of really good podcasts. Some of the smartest people in the world doing interviews, some of the smartest storytellers and interviewers doing those interviews. We have, anytime somebody comes out with a book, they do an interview, they do often a TEDx talk or a Google talk or something like that. So you can access it on YouTube. Or audiobooks. And now with Audible subscription, you can get any book in their whole library for $10. So any book in the world. And now they have so many books. So it's really just crazy. And most of us don't even, consider how much of a miracle it is. We just kind of get used to it. So what are areas of double time in your life? And actually, while you're doing this, I want you to think about why I'm going through this. I want you to think about your life here. What are areas where right now you're commuting, but you're not doing anything, or you're doing chores and you're not taking advantage of double time? So let's just go through a few examples. So it's recommended by I actually don't know what, governmental organization, but it's recommended that we do get at least 3 to 4 sessions per week of 20 minutes of aerobic exercise, and that we do 10,000 steps per day of walking. The average person, I think their commute is 27 minutes each way. And then, of course, we also go to the gym, run errands, things like that. So lots of time we're in the car. And then, of course, just to upkeep a house, there's dishes, laundry, cleaning, taking in and out the garbage. Actually, that's not, but organizing garbage, the yard work, all that kind of stuff. There's prepping and eating food, which we spend at least often an hour a day doing. And then there's a time right after we wake up where we're kind of transitioning and waking up, and then time when we're falling asleep and letting go of the day. And those are great times where we can expose ourselves. Now, I'm not suggesting that you spend every single minute of that listening to audiobooks or something like that. Still good to have time for yourself or to let your mind wander. But even just taking a fraction of that, everyone here probably has hours a day that they could be using for learning that you're not. So that's really good. And we got a question here. Jane was asking, Michael, I'm assuming mindless activities might be dangerous to learn on the treadmill, risk falling down. Yeah. I think the basic things, it's pretty safe. I wouldn't recommend, I don't use the treadmill that much, so I wouldn't recommend jogging on the treadmill and doing this, but although it could work. Let's see. So I'll just give you an example from my life. One thing is I use Fitbit and to track the number of steps that I do per day. And I also do challenges on Fitbit where you could go compete against other people. I don't know why, but I oddly get extreme amount of motivation just for beating other people. And I'm in a group with other people that they get like 15 to 20,000 steps per day. So that really gives me a lot of satisfaction to do that, even though it probably shouldn't. But so I recommend Fitbit to track your steps and actually look at it. Apple Watch obviously works too, or other devices. And then when I'm walking, I listen to audiobooks, I listen to podcasts, I listen to downloaded YouTube videos that I found. And of course, I curated all of these. And then I also have a list of people on speed dial where I call them. We have informal relationships where we feel comfortable calling each other and at any time, and we don't feel bad if we can't do it. I'm a member of a gym, so I do book and bakes where I take a book into the sauna and get reading in there. And on the commute to I actually work from home, but when I go to the cafes or I walk in a town about 15 minutes away. So when I go there, I listen and learn. Yard work. In our company, we do a weekly root cause analysis call where we analyze the problems that came up during the week and we identify their root cause. And this is something we talk about in the Learning Ritual course. And then we actually think about solutions for it as well. And then relationship conversations. This is kind of trying to transform time that's kind of mindless conversation to conversation where we're both learning and growing. So even, for example, my wife and I spoke an hour and a half yesterday. Yesterday was kind of an extreme day, but in the morning we took a parenting class together. If you have kids, I really recommend the nurtured heart approach. And then in the evening after the kids were asleep, we had an hour and a half conversation that was talking about just our lessons learned with parenting together. And then I do, during lunchtime once a week, I do a weekly mental model call where a group of us talk about mental models. So this is a routine that I've built up over years, but I just wanted to share examples from my life. So the bottom line is you have the time. So let's find that time right now on this call and actually get this set up. And if you're already doing an hour a day, that's awesome. Maybe you could do 2 hours per day. So let's first think about what double time habits you want to create. You want to set bulletproof reminders. So it goes from an intention to an action. You actually remember it. And then I'm going to show you little things that I do to get the most out of it. So as a first step here, let me share this with you. Copying and pasting is not working. Editing group project. Okay. Let me share this with everyone then. You can just copy this link to bit.ly/fast-start-masterclass. I created a template for the exercises in today's call. So let me just click that link, see if it works. Okay. So go ahead and open that document and then click on it and duplicate it so that you can use it for yourself and customize it. I'll give you guys a chance to duplicate it. And I'm going to give you a few minutes right now to fill this in for yourself. What are a few areas in your life where there's spare time that you're willing and able to turn that into learning time? If you have any questions about the activity or anything I've said so far, go ahead and ask it in the comments. And once you're done thinking about it, just let me know in the comments so that I know to move on. So in terms of what to focus on, if I were you, you had all these possibilities, I would do your commute. I think that's just a really easy time. And it's a big block of time there. And I would start with your commute. So think about what time you're, and think about what times you're going to do it, and then think about what you can do during that time to learn. And I'll share a few hacks. So the challenge with learning while you're commuting is obviously that the most important thing is that you're actually safe. And so a few things that have worked for me. One is mastering Google Assistant or Siri, whatever phone you have, and getting good at voice commands. And then two is I have an iPhone, so I use the audio journal app that just comes with it now. And that saves it to iCloud right away and records. So if I learn something that's really interesting and that makes me think, I'll pause and I'll literally just share my thoughts of, that's really interesting. What if I applied this to over there? Or what if I applied it here? And just for the same reason that writing in a journal almost creates a feedback system, or when you talk to somebody, you have unique ideas. The same thing is with an audio journal. it kind of helps you have more coherent thoughts, where if you're just kind of thinking in your head, it's very easy to wander or kind of come in and out of consciousness and then go to thinking about something that happened earlier in the day. Any questions? Jessica, Annie, Dieter, Vladimir. I want to make sure that this makes sense. And by the end of this call, love you to have an extra hour a day of learning. Okay. I'm going to stop us there and go forward. So step number 2 is to set reminders. And the thing is, we could say, okay, I'm going to do it on the commute, but then as soon as we get in the car, we get into our normal routines that we've been doing forever, and it's really easy to forget. So I'm going to give you an app that will make sure that doesn't happen. It's one of the best apps I've downloaded. You can see here, I think this is the iOS ratings. It's the same thing for Google. Really highly rated app. It's an alarm app, and that's unique. So you can set recurring alarms, which comes standard with alarm apps now. But what you can also do is have a mission. So I generally do mathematical problems and memorization problems where it'll give you, and you can choose whether you want it easy and medium or hard, or you have to shake your iPhone a certain number of times. And what's great about this is normally when I set a reminder, I get a text message or something, I almost become blind to it and I don't respond to it. Or let's say I get an alarm, the alarm goes off, great, but then I'm in the middle of something, so I just shut the alarm off really fast and go back to what I'm doing. These activities require all of your brain power to do. It'll be like 52 times 3 plus 27. That's kind of some of the type of math problems. So you really have to use all your working memory. And it's just really good at interrupting. So really, really recommend this. And so if you know your commute is at 9 a.m. every day, or 8 a.m., go ahead and set your alarm for 8:05 a.m., something like that. And I would recommend using the shaking thing since you'll be driving. I won't be able to do the math things. So for now, just download the app and set 1 or 2 reminders. And I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Yep, I got a question. It is alarming. All right, going to assume you've done that so far. And then, so now you have the times where you want to do it and you set the alarm. The next thing is to collect materials. So if you're driving and the alarm goes off and you're like, okay, I'm going to listen to something. If you don't have good material in your queue to listen to, you're not going to be able to do the research in that moment. So it's always good to have a list of different audiobooks, podcasts, and YouTubes that you've already spent a lot of time vetting And you know that these are going to be really high quality ones. So that's why I look for, obviously, quality for which ones are the most learning dense. And then I also look for excitingness and curiosity. And the reason that's really important is sometimes when you're commuting either to or from work, you're tired, you don't feel like going deep on something. And so it's really valuable to start off listening to something that you're really excited about. And then once you're excited and your energy's up, then it's easier to switch to something more difficult. But the key thing is getting started. All right. Step number 4 is to pre-collect learning partners. So one of my favorite ways to learn when I'm driving, especially, or other times, is talking to other people. You're talking to someone else who's, just as curious as you, loves applying the information and doing different areas. One, you get to listen to what people are dealing with, or what they're learning, or their biggest ahas recently. So it's this new source of information where it's almost like, for example, I have a friend who right now recently sold his company. So he's been learning full time for the past few months. He wakes up at 5 a.m. and then he basically works and learns until the evening, just 100% learning. So every time we don't talk for 2 weeks, let's say, he's already read 10 or 20 books, and he's practiced, thought about how to apply them. And so when I talk to him, I'm getting the best of what he's learned. And I'm getting book recommendations and things like that. And then, so if you have people in your life that you think could be a good partner, what I recommend is reaching out to them and talking to them and just sharing the idea with them, and that you have all this commute time, and seeing if they'd be interested in just informal conversations. If it's okay if you text them when you're just commuting, you have an idea, and then inviting them to reach out to you as well. And then the other thing I found valuable is just really doing catch up, and doing is great. And small talk is nice, but it's at the same time, for these calls, it's also great to just develop a pattern of just jumping right into it, because you both already love learning. You already know each other, so you can save a lot of time that way as well. So to summarize there, to take the most out of double time is determine which double time habits you're going to follow, set bulletproof reminders with Alarmy, pre-collect learning materials so you can jump right into them. You don't have to think about it. Go for high quality and exciting materials at different levels, and then pre-collect learning partners as well, so you could quickly just speed dial someone and get their information. And actually, I should put this in here, put them on speed dial. That's the other thing that I do. Okay, so far we've talked about finding learning time, and then within learning time, there's different approaches, but we talked about double time. And then within double time, we talked about double time habits that you could follow. And then actually you go out in a level here and talk about the commute. There's just a fraction of the different ways that you could find time in your schedule. So I am going to pause there and see if there are any questions. Okay, questions coming in. Good question. How do you initiate the first convo with a potential learning partner? I feel a bit awkward asking. So this is something we do talk about in the course, is the idea of building a learning network. So, we don't just get learning from the information or books we read, we get it from the people that we're surround ourselves by, both the close connections and the weak ties as well. And what I've learned by doing this course and just talking to, I've had dozens of one-on-one conversations and talk to tons of people through our weekly group coaching calls, is I've learned that most people do not have a learning network. They have a default network. And what I mean by default network is that people default to talking to people that they're happen to be run into the most. So those are neighbors, parents of your kids' friends, people that you work with, things like that. And then those conversations are very contextual of, like, you're talking to the neighbor, it's like, hey, great weather. Can you believe this thing happened in our block? Or colleagues happens to be around work. Few people have taken the time to develop relationships of people who have similar goals in life that are long-term goals and are just as dedicated to learning and growing. And the beauty of those relationships is that those relationships are beyond context of a specific job or a specific focus, and they can last for a really long time. And they're really deep because you're really helping each other at a deep level. You're being vulnerable. There's one, I engage with a learning network that I have in a bunch of different ways. One thing I've been doing we actually just calculated, it's over 10 years. We had our anniversary last May in 2018. And we've been doing a weekly call every Sunday at 5 p.m. Both of the entrepreneurs so we started when we were in our 20s, and one person, is a very, very, both of them are very, very successful entrepreneurs. And one is building a hotel right now, and another one, owns hundreds of billboards and thousands of self-storage units and over 50 commercial properties. So having a learning network can be really powerful. And I'd say it starts with identifying people in your network who you could have that relationship with and who love learning, and how to ask for it. If that person loves learning, you can even just test people, like, what's the latest thing you've learned? And you probably, the people who have better, so rather than just saying, hey, what's new, you could say, what's the latest thing you've learned? What's the latest thing that's surprised you? And naturally, the people who are focusing on more learning and growth, they're going to be like, oh my God, this amazing thing, or this amazing thing, I'm going to do this thing differently. And I also look for energy, obviously rapport with that person as well. So if you have that energy and rapport and common goals, then it's really natural. All right, I'm going to go on here. So we've talked about learning time, and I hope that you see how much time that you can save by doing this stuff, or that you can create, and that how life-changing that could be. If you learn an hour per week, that's equivalent of, let's say, at least one book. That's 52 books per year. And even just 5 books, if you read 5 books on any area, you're going to have a basic understanding of the keywords in that area, the key ideas, and have a level of competency. And so if you do that, you're 50 books, that's 10 different areas you're doing that in. And given that one book can be life-changing, if you're able to pick the right books to read, this simple habit can change your life. Just like, if you go to the gym once a day for 20 minutes, that can help you live, 10 years longer, 20 years longer. So it's not hard intellectually. It's just a matter of doing it consistently. Okay, so let's go back to this model of the learning loop that we talked about. And we had a question about, what does a learning loop look like? How do you use it? How do you improve it? So we're going to dive right into that right now. So the first thing is information. So the different sources of information, first, the way to think about it is people, information, and experiences. And we go deep into each of these in the course, but I've just talked about people. Information is like through books, articles, podcasts, even doing your own data analysis, things like that. And then experiences as well, that all experiences aren't created equal. Someone having really diverse, different experiences that are challenging but doable is going to have a very different learning rate than someone who's, just stays in the same home, same place every day and doesn't have many experiences. So these are the levers that we can change the people that we're around, the books that are around, the experiences we have, and each of those is going to impact our learning rate. Evan Williams from Twitter and now Medium has this great quote. He says, "The information we consume matters just as much as the food we put into our body. It affects our thinking, our behavior, how we understand our place in the world, and how we understand others." And it's also a phenomenon of garbage in, garbage out. So you probably saw this headline 2 years ago when Microsoft launched its AI chatbot. And basically, immediately, as you can imagine, people went on there and started cursing at it and saying terrible things at it. And then the bot itself became racist, a racist asshole, as they say in this article. And even though the algorithm behind it was really smart, the information was bad. And the same is for us. And surprising amounts we live in this really crazy climate today where it's hard to know what's true. 50 of the top 100 academic studies in psychology have not replicated past that standard. So much of the information we get from the news or other areas is biased. And so being able to discern what is actually really high quality information can have a transformative impact. And one thing that people don't appreciate about information is that the value of information does not go on a bell curve where, with a bell curve, let's just take height as an example. You're never going to find a human, or maybe a few times in history, where someone's over 8 feet, and you're not going to find someone under a foot tall. So there's not a lot of variance. But when it comes to areas like learning and knowledge, there's some knowledge that has a negative impact on your life. You can destroy it. Let's say like you're in a cult or something, and then the knowledge there is completely distorted and biased. So it actually makes you more stupid. And then there's other information that can be completely life-changing. And it's even just a sentence or a book can do that. So there's a quote from an article I wrote, but it's relevant here. It says, "Right now, somewhere out in the world is a paragraph, chapter, or book that would change your life forever if you read it. I call this kind of information breakthrough knowledge, and mastering the ability to find breakthrough knowledge in our era of information overload is one of the most important skills we can develop." And so the question becomes, how do we filter all of this information and pick the best information? That's a question we get all the time in the course. And so there's lots of different approaches. In this course, we talk about a lot of different approaches. Right now, I'm going to talk about the multiplier skills checklist. So I think it's easy to understand and apply it to your life. All right, great. So the multiplier skills checklist is a checklist of criteria you can use to assess the value of the information you want to learn or the skills and determine what to do. So I'm just going to go through each one by one. You get an idea. So the first thing is future-proof. There's a great book called The Half-Life of Facts, written by a researcher who studies the rate at which information decays. And so for some disciplines, it's faster than others. I think in like radiology, it's something like 45 years. That half of the information in the field, the half-life is 45 years. So if somebody's at the beginning of their career, got a great degree, and then let's say they graduate at 22, then they're still practicing at 67, over half of the information is inaccurate. And I don't know about you, but I've just kind of had terrible experiences with physicians where they're very confident and they just are not correct. And it's just really frustrating if you've been in that kind of situation. And so we have to avoid that ourselves. And so we need to ask ourselves, what's the staying power of the information we have? And then the scary thing is that when information becomes outdated, it's not like we get a text message saying, this thing you learned 20 years ago and yet you're using every day, it's no longer true. So you can replace it with X. Instead, we start getting results in a different area, in an area, and we don't have to troubleshoot what we're missing here. So that's future proof. Then the next thing is we actually want the information to be useful. It's really easy to get sucked into the entertainment or clickbait headlines and read something and it feels like you're doing something, but you're really not learning anything. And in a way, that's what basically like social media is programming us to do, is to like feel like we're connecting with our friends and building deep relationships or doing something, and it's giving us likes and comments, and it feels like that's, and it's making it so we're confusing action with results. And so there's two ways to think about whether something is useful in your life. So number one, does it help you move closer to a goal? And therefore, one of the highest levers you could have with learning, and why we start off the course with goals, is the more specific you are with the goal you want to accomplish, and the obstacles stopping you from getting that goal, the more you could then focus on learning a very specific piece of knowledge. So let me give an example. Let's say you were very specific that you wanted a promotion from your boss in the next 6 months. So as a result of getting so specific, you can go to your boss right now and say, hey, like, I love this. I want to constantly grow and learn. And I'm not sure how to say it, but would you consider here's how you can say it. Would you consider, or do you think I could be considered for a promotion if I learn or grow in a certain way? What would I need to learn? What demonstration of that knowledge would you see? And if you get that feedback from your boss, then in 6 months, you can revisit and say, hey, here's what I've done to learn. Here's how I practiced it and mastered it. And you can be considered for a promotion. But by being very specific about what you wanted and getting feedback from the person who could actually give you that goal, you're going to be much more targeted than saying, hey, I want to do better in my career. What should I learn next? So there's usefulness in terms of goals. Then there's also problems. So most people ignore this lens and just ignore problems. And in the course, what we teach is to be aware of the problems in your life, and especially the problems that happen over and over and that grow bigger over time if you don't solve them. And by proactively identifying those problems, their root cause, and then looking for learning materials related to that, you can grow a lot faster. The next aspect is now. We want information that we're going to be able to apply right now. In college, I took in high school and middle school, I took 6 years of French. So that's 45 minutes a day, 180 days per year for 6 years. So it's a crazy amount of time. And I've literally used French, a handful of times since I graduated 18 years ago. And I didn't really even have to. It was like, well, I guess and I couldn't really even understand the French because I've forgotten so much of it. So the reality is that if we don't use something, especially for a long time, we forget the large majority of it. And then if we're not using it, we're also just not getting the value. So there's a huge difference between that. And if I learn something that valuable, like let's say learning how to learn, and I was using that every single day, that my life would be in a different place, basically. And then the next thing is rare. So in the course, we talk about the difference between learning to keep up and learning to have an advantage in your career. And most of the people, they focus on they try to find useful knowledge that they can use, but they're learning what everyone else is learning. And therefore they're a commodity and just kind of keeping up with people, but not getting ahead. I'll give you an example of the importance of rarity. In our market economy, with the supply and demand curve for knowledge or anything, what determines the price of something is its supply, how rare its supply is, and the demand for it. And so let's say you knew CPR. There's CPR is hugely valuable. It's literally life-saving could be for some people, but so many people know how to do CPR that if you learn it, you can't charge millions of dollars for learning it or teaching it. But if you did have something that could save someone's life, you could charge more if you were the only person in the world that has it. I'm not saying you jack up the prices. I'm just giving that as an example. The next thing is universal. When most people are thinking about knowledge, they're learning it in a very narrow way. So let's say they're learning at a hack level. So let's say they're learning math and they're just applying it to one area versus applying it all over. Or if they're just learning about sales, they're just applying it to how to get a better sale on a specific product, and they're not going deeper on how to make it more universal. And certain knowledge is just more generalizable. Then complementary, you already have built up a huge amount of knowledge in your life. And so there's certain knowledge combinations that you could add to your existing knowledge that would have more of a multiplier than other knowledge. So for example, for me as a writer and a teacher, the multipliers are understanding scientific research and understanding how to find high quality scientific research, understanding journalism, understanding copywriting and more influence, understanding education and how people change. And having those different areas has allowed me to be a more effective teacher, allowed me to have a larger audience. The average article we write has over 200,000 views just organically, and allows to build a business as well. Oftentimes people specialize in just one of those areas. So in your field, there may be bundles as well. All right, we got a question. Jason says, I'm a senior marketing exec and have to learn on the job. How do you balance learning info that needs updating all the time, like Facebook ads, and a timeless like copywriting, learning how to learn? Is there a ratio you recommend that's best for a high-level career, if there's even one? That's a really, really good question. And I don't think about it as a ratio. I do think about it as both are really, really important. That I'm not an absolutist to say that hacks aren't important. Ultimately, like if we're learning like how to, let's say, do Facebook ads, we want the formula that works right now. So, and a lot of the learning should be directed towards that. On the other hand, we want it's really valuable to understand the general principles of copywriting so you can create better ads. The way I look at it is, number one, you just want to always be doing both. There's a much higher focus and urgency to focus on the hack. So I think generally people undervalue the timeless aspects of it because it takes longer to understand the principle and apply it in that way versus like, okay, just give me the hack that works right now. So I would recommend devoting a certain amount of time of your learning to it. I devote a huge amount of my time to it, dozens of hours a month to that type of knowledge. And I particularly recommend doing it in the beginning of your career, because as soon as possible, because this is the timeless knowledge is a knowledge you're going to use over and over again. So if you're going to use something over and over again, you might as well just learn it sooner than later so you can have it as a tool in your tool belt and then go on the specific hacks. So my personal style is to lean a little bit more towards the timeless stuff. All right, great. Happy that was helpful, Jason. So what I have for you is a template that we created that you can use. So let me give the link for you. And as you can see, this is a checklist that you can use for the different areas and use it in your own life. All right. So just to give you some examples of multiplier skills, decision making. We're constantly making decisions throughout our day. Some decisions are more important than others and really can have a big impact on our life. And if we can become better at understanding what makes a good decision and making them, that could have a profound difference in our life. Learning how to learn. I've already told you about that. Problem solving. You know, if we have a way of being aware of problems, identifying them, the different types, the symptoms, the root causes. Emotional regulation. So much of learning, once you have the knowledge and the algorithm, is being able to manage procrastination, manage fear, manage competing commitments that stop us from taking action. These are the skills that they're actually not changing that much, what goes into them, and they will last you a lifetime. And many people never even think about this as a category of skills, which is crazy. And then, so I'm going to pause here and do an exercise. And so I'd like you to think about how you can use the multiplier skills checklist in your own life. So go ahead and go to the Google Doc, the spreadsheet we have. Give you guys the link. Well, since you've already duplicated it earlier, you have it. So go to the Google spreadsheet, and what I recommend doing is entering in the different skills that you could learn and running them through each of the different things through FUNRUCC. And what I secondly recommend doing is, once you have the skills there that you're considering learning, to rate each skill on a scale from 1 to 10 and then add them up. And thanks for posting the links, Ian. And while you're doing the exercise, if you have any questions, this would be a good time about this section of, we just covered the first part of the learning loop, which is information and how to get information advantage. And I see some folks have not asked any questions yet. So Dieter, Stephen, Cathers, Vladimir, Orrin, and others. Now it's a good time to ask a question. And you took the time to be here, and I just want to make sure that you get as much value as possible from these calls. Sure. Dieter asked, could you please write down one example of how the skill works with FunRock? So let's go through this. So let's just take habit design. Okay. So there's the skill of learning how to do your habits, to basically if you have an intention to do something, how do you turn that intention into a consistent habit? What happens for a lot of people, they don't even think about that as a skill. And if they don't take action consistently on their goals, they just label themselves as lazy, or they make excuses rather than just improving at it. So let's just run habit skills. So let's think about the future. Is the ability to create new habits or take actions going to be difficult or going to be important in the future? And the answer is yes. It's going to be just as valuable 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Is it useful? Yes, fundamentally, if you're not able to take action, doesn't matter how much you learn, you're not going to be able to turn them into results in your life. And basically you're going to be like a bookworm, essentially, where have lots of knowledge. You might be really good at a cocktail party, but you're not going to actually get results in your career from your learning. Then is it useful now? And I'm guessing you probably have different things. You'd love to exercise more, to eat healthier, to maybe put time into building relationships, to cement your learning ritual. So that's something you can use right now. And then is it rare? Over the past few years, there have been some books on habit change that have gotten a lot of press. So it is becoming less rare, but it's still very rare. Like, have you ever seen a course at a college or secondary school on setting habits or changing your behavior? Probably not. And in this course, this is why we have a whole section on habit change. Then another aspect is universal. So habit change, you could apply that across your entire life. It's not just, you could make better health habits, better relationship habits with, let's say, for example, I mentioned the parenting. I took a parenting class. We're taking a parenting class and working on being the best parents we can be. So we're using the nurtured heart approach, and we're applying it there. And the next is complementary. This one, it's a multiplier. So habit change is going to be very helpful as a multiplier. It's probably not the highest multiplier that you could have for your given skill set. It's often that I notice in different fields, there's different bundles of skills that are particularly valuable. So, for someone who's very, very technical, for example, learning communication skills could have a really big multiplier effect, and vice versa. Or someone who's very, very academic and theoretical, learning applied knowledge is very powerful. So those go really well together. And then curiosity is whether you find this interesting. And one of my favorite books, my top 5 books of this year, probably top 25 of my life out of the thousands I've read, is a book called Greatness Cannot Be Planned, or thinking Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned. It was written by one of the founding members of Uber's AI division, and also professors of artificial intelligence. And I'm not going to go into details of the book, but they talk about how humans are really particularly good at noticing things that are interesting. Like, it's not something that a computer could do. That we can't really explain why something is interesting, but we're really good at it. And it's often a signal that there's greater learning there. And also, if you're really interested in something, you're going to put a lot more effort into it. So this formula is not purely just, about cognitive, logical thinking. We can trust our body as well. Okay. How do you even identify a truly rare skill is another question, apart from a popularity. Yeah, this is an interesting one. So it's interesting to note that many people's algorithm for picking skills is the opposite. People think about, okay, what's the best-selling book out there? I'm going to get that. What's the top video or podcast? I'm going to listen to that. And so most people not only are they not focusing on rare, they're doing the opposite. I'm not saying it's never valuable to do popular stuff, but in my experience, the rareness comes from that creates an advantage. And so, if everyone else is talking about, it's actually one thing I found is some of the most valuable skills in my life, there's not even a name for the skill yet, which is interesting. Because you think about, to become a skill, you kind of have to, multiple people have to recognize this thing as like a distinct thing. They have to name it. Then other people have to name it. And then people have to they identify it as valuable, then it becomes required in classes, and all freshmen are required to take it. And so as I've gone deeper and deeper on it and thinking about what are the most valuable skills, just like most people, like we had our list here, most people wouldn't think about these skills here: emotional regulation, behavior change, problem solving, learning how to learn as skills. Although those are becoming more powerful. Lost where I was. Okay. Good questions. So one of the reasons you probably heard that we created a mental model club where every month we share a new mental model. And let me just give a link to that actually, so you know I'm talking about. So each mental model is an example of a rare skill in my mind. And it's why that one of the reasons, selfish reasons, that I've co-founded this mental model club is because I get to learn all these rare skills. Let's see, put it in the chat. Here we go. Any other questions? If not, I will continue going. How are we doing on time here? All right. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit faster here because I just realized we're an hour. We only have 20 more minutes. Okay. And feel free to ask questions as we go along. So the next thing is, once we get all this information, and we get 1000x information, we get breakthrough knowledge that has the potential to change our life. Now there's algorithms to ways we analyze that. And the human mind is an amazing, amazing way of processing information, but it also has biases. It has ways that we're wired that we predictably act illogically. And you've probably heard of cognitive biases. It's almost, there's dozens and or even hundreds of books on the different cognitive biases out there. Confirmation bias, fundamental attribution error, loss aversion, things like this. So being aware of cognitive bias is powerful. Mental models, which I just talked about, having a decision-making frameworks. These are all the things that could help us process the information better. And for today, I'm going to share a very simple one with you, which in the course we call the ha hack. And this is as a general rule of thumb, I try to do a ha hack every 10 minutes or so into reading or learning something new, whether it's an event like this, where I'm doing a live class as a student, or when I'm reading a book. And this will speak to everyone here who worries about forgetting information. So you read information and then you write a book and you're like, okay, that was kind of interesting. And then 3 weeks later, somebody asks you what the book was about and you completely forget and you can barely even share anything. So what we want instead, this is a burr. If you've ever walked through a field, let's say in the fall, these are each, if I could zoom in here, you'd see that each one of those things is a hook. And this plant was the inspiration for Velcro, and because the plant will stick to your pants. And what we want the knowledge is, we want the knowledge to go from the author's schema organization and stick in and be transformed so that it sticks at multiple points into our head. So multiple pathways go through the knowledge that you learned. So here's how the ha hack works. It's really simple. So when you're reading something, or let's say going through a talk today, and what crossed your mind is, that's interesting, or yeah, I could see you doing that. That sounds really interesting. Rather than just letting that go, it's really taking time to pause and first apply and think about, okay, how could I apply this across my life? How could I apply multiplier skills to my life right now? And you think about, okay, well, I'm thinking about learning about artificial intelligence. Okay, what would that look like if it went through the ha hack? Or, that was interesting about double time. Okay, what double time might work for me? What are all the different types of double time in my own life? So it's good to come up with at least 5 different examples of how you could apply it, how it's relevant to your life. And then number 2 is to act. Ultimately, one way that knowledge is transformed into value is that we actually take action with it. So what I invite you to do right now is to spend a minute and do a ha hack. Think about one thing that from today's talk that is interesting or valuable to you, and then write down 5 areas in your life where it could be relevant. And then think about what's one thing you could do to act on it to get value from it. So I'll give you guys a minute to do that. And as you're doing that, feel free to ask any questions you have. All right. I'm going to go a little bit faster here, but what I want you to take away from that is it's really simple, and that's on purpose. You know, I wanted to pick the most simple things you could do to your life that can have a profound effect. The thing that to watch out for is that sometimes we judge our learning based on the number of books we read. And so we feel like if we spend extra time looking for the best books, or we're spending extra time thinking about applying it, that takes away from the time that we're actually learning. So it's really important, if you might have that on a subconscious level, to let go of judging your learning by your reading and judge it by your results. I'd rather read less, but read better books and apply them. And that's the idea of this course. Okay. The next part, this is where there's a whole another set of skills, is you've analyzed something, and now you're ready to take action on it. And so in any given book, you might have tons of different things you want to apply, but realistically, you just don't have that much time. So part of the skill here, the lever, is deciding what to take action on of all the hacks and things that you've identified. And then the other thing is the ability to overcome emotional obstacles. If we were a computer or a robot, this would be the easy part. But for humans, we have all these emotions, and emotions are great, but they can get in the way. Lots of people procrastinate. It's easy to be like, well, yeah, it's easy to convince ourselves out of why it's not worth taking action of something we're afraid of. We also have competing commitments. We're like, okay, I have this deadline tomorrow, but should I learn this thing that's going to pay off over 30 years? How do I decide? Or I'm committed to changing in this relationship, but I'm afraid because of something that happened when I was younger or whatever. There's all these things that stop us from taking action. And then it comes to habit change as well, as the ability to turn an action that works into a habit you do consistently. So there's lots of ways to do this. And I'm just going to give you one framework we share in the course. It's a really simple one. So all of us probably have a to-do list that's much larger than the time we have. And deciding which of the things we do has a really profound impact on our life. So that's an important skill. And a great framework that comes from Sean Ellis, who's a very successful entrepreneur in the world of growth hacking, is the ICE framework. So if you have a large to-do list or a large project list or a large goal list, you can use this framework. So one is you rate the project on a scale of 1 to 10 for impact. What's the potential of this project or this business idea? Is it just a small potential or is it high? Then the next you want to think about is your confidence or the probability of that thing happening. And so then you're starting to think probabilistically, which is great. And impact times confidence is also expected value, important concept. And then of course, we can't just think about the potential returns. We have to think about the cost as well. Everything we do is going to have a time cost, and sometimes it's going to have a money cost, and sometimes there's even other costs as well. Maybe it creates more complexity or something like that. So when you put all of your projects, actions, goals through this framework and rate each one on a scale from 1 to 10, it gives you helps to identify the actions that have the highest probability to have a really big impact. And this is really important because, again, it's not a bell curve here. So there's almost a double exponential. So the first exponential is out of all the information you could get in the millions of books out there, you want to find the book that's going to have the highest probability of changing your life. And then once you're reading that book, you're getting a lot of ideas for action. And some actions could really change your life. Other actions might be a waste of time. So you want to find those few actions that are going to really make a difference. So I'm going to skip this because I'm getting low on time, but I would recommend doing that if you can right after this phone call. List your current to-do list and then rank each item on your to-do list on a scale of impact, confidence, and ease. So now we've gone through 3 steps in the learning loop: information, algorithms, experimentation. Now we're going to get to probably the most underestimated part, which is feedback. When was the last time you thought about, how can I get better feedback in each area of my life? And feedback, there's the timing of the feedback, there's the source, the resolution it comes back to you on, the quality, the type. And this feedback is really important because if it's delayed and it comes from a different source, so let's say you're having a relationship challenge, but really it's because you haven't gotten enough sleep, then it's confusing because it's coming from different source. Actually, the root cause may not be a relationship problem, and maybe it takes multiple days to come through. So feedback, if you do something and then you don't see the result for a few days or even a few months, it can be hard to understand cause and effect. So I'm going to give you a few examples of very prominent entrepreneurs and leaders talking about the power of feedback for them.
Okay, sure. So I think in terms of advice, okay, sure. So I think in terms of advice, it's very important to seek out, to actively seek out and listen very carefully to negative feedback. And this is something that people tend to avoid because it's painful.
Yeah.
But I think this is a very common mistake, is to not actively seek out and listen to negative feedback.
Where do you do that? Do you go into forums? Do you go into Twitter? Like, what are your areas where you go to look for feedback on, let's say, the Tesla?
Well, it's like everyone I talk to is, in fact, when friends get a product, I say, look, don't tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like.
Right.
And because otherwise your friend is not going to tell you what he doesn't like.
Right.
He's going to say, oh, I love this and that, and then leave out the this is the stuff I don't like list. Because he wants to be your friend, doesn't want to offend you. So you really need to sort of coax negative feedback. And you know that if somebody is your friend, or at least not your enemy, and they're giving you negative feedback, then they may be wrong, but it's coming from a good place. And sometimes even your enemies give you good negative feedback.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's important. People should just view like positive feedback like water off a duck's back. That's like, really underweight that and overweight negative feedback.
Right.
Yeah, so Elon Musk has been a lot in the news lately. This video is a little bit old, but it really speaks to, he was asked, what are the biggest advice that you have for entrepreneurs? And that was his answer, which is crazy because you think about Elon Musk and you feel like, oh, there must be other things. You wouldn't think that getting negative feedback would be one of the top things. And what's important to understand about feedback is that when we go through life, it actually feels like we're experiencing reality, and we're not. We're designed to survive and reproduce. We're not designed to understand what reality is. And there's distortions. And the reason we think we're experiencing reality when we're not is because of blind spots. So we can have visual blind spots, and you've probably done the exercise where you can see your visual blind spots, but we also have emotional and cognitive blind spots. And I'll show you a funny video that speaks to that.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
No, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things my way.
I love that video. It's so true, though. Even what I've noticed myself, there's parts of my life where I'm very open to feedback, but then there's other parts where I'm closed off, and it's important for one of the highest leverage things we can do to get feedback, are things like decreasing the delay between positive and negative, creating a dashboard in our business, having higher quality feedback. But to me, the biggest thing has been focusing on understanding what our blind spots are. Because as soon as a blind spot comes that we weren't even aware of, in a domain that we weren't even aware of, or an effect we weren't having on people, it just opens up all of this learning and other ways of experiencing reality. I'm gonna have one final short video here. Is Ray Dalio. If you read my articles, you've probably seen me mention him before. He's the founder of the largest hedge fund in the world that he's built up over 30 years or 40 years, I guess. He's a philanthropist. He wrote a book that was a New York Times bestseller last year. And he talks about feedback in the context of building a culture at a business that's radically transparent.
The biggest issues, I think, that we all face as individuals is not knowing whether we're right or wrong and not being straightforward with each other. And the ability of being able to have disagreement. Can you have straightforward disagreement without it being a problem, was the dilemma. And I was demoralizing people. And so what it struck me is we should then have a discussion. What could I do about that? I didn't want to demoralize people. And I particularly wanted to have a great relationships with these people.
But you also didn't want to sugarcoat things.
And I didn't want to sugarcoat things. So what it led me to do is to start to write down, reach a mutual agreement. How am I going to be with you? How should you be with me? In other words, should I tell you what I really think? Can you be free to tell me what you really think? Or should I not do that? And we would have those conversations, the people I worked with, and then we would I would write down the principles. And by the way, these principles, not me, has been the basis of whatever success I've had. It's not principles. And they're mostly about the idea of how to have thoughtful disagreement.
Yeah. So yeah, we go through this work world and like we ask for feedback on our ideas or what do you think? And how do you think I look? We're just getting wildly over positive feedback often. And because who wants to be the person that just tells somebody what you actually think, especially in our PC world that we live in right now. And you're just so much to lose by being blunt with someone. So we have to go overboard in the other direction to get honest feedback. And we got a question was, how do you personally deal with feedback that you feel really resistant to, especially in real time? So the more I practice this, the more it sounds easy to do, like, oh, I can do blind spots. But the more I realize there is, like, everyone has real blind spots. And so how do I it's really hard to do it in real time. Like, I'll just give an example, like with my wife, we've been together 18 years now. It's hard to believe. And so when we get in a disagreement and like tempers are flaring and we're saying, well, you did this and you did that. And like, it's just, we're being very emotional and acting like kids. It's hard in that moment to like suck it up. And even though you feel like you were wrong, even though you weren't, but just how it feels emotionally, to then be like, okay, let me take a step back here and like really understand what's happening. What has worked really well for me is once a week, she and I take a walk, and it's just, our rule on that is each of us has the space to share whatever we're thinking, and honestly is thinking. Any other person just has to listen. It's not a back and forth. So we do that during a time when we have energy during the day still. And that's really helpful about that is I can really plan for it and be like, okay, I'm bracing myself. Like, she might be talking about something I'm triggering, but that's triggering for me, but I'm just to listen. And that's what works really well. And so the nice thing about asking people for feedback is you can really prepare for it and brace yourself and kind of get yourself in the space of like, I just want to learn. It's not whether I disagree or I don't want to correct them. I just want to understand what they're saying and really get to the reality of it. Because there's some truth there. So some feedback tips for you. I'm looking at the time. I'm going to share the slides because we're basically at time right now. And as an exercise, what I recommend you do is go to one of your friends, someone in your life who you think would understand you even better than maybe you understand yourself in some areas, and ask them for feedback. Maybe send them an email. And in those emails, I find it's really powerful to just tell them like exactly what I said. Like, I really admire you. I appreciate your feedback. When you've shared it in the past, it's really made a big difference. You know parts of me that I know better than I know myself. And it really mean a lot to me to get some feedback because I want to understand if I have blind spots. Would you be open to a quick phone call later this week or during a nighttime to talk about this? Thank you. Something like that. And I think I created a template here. Oops, all attendees. It's a template that you can use to get feedback. So to summarize here, when you think about your professional success, you want to remember this formula: learning time times learning rate. And you want to think about how you can continually be increasing each of these. You want to go from 15 minutes a day of learning to an hour per day to multiple hours per day. Warren Buffett spends 80% of his time reading and thinking. And then your learning rate, you have the ability to 10x your learning rate from wherever you are right now. And so you want to be thinking about every time you're learning is an opportunity to learn how to learn better. And if you're going to spend an hour every day learning, then if you learn how to learn better, you're going to make each of those hours more fruitful. So this shows a schema of what we've talked about. I showed you learning time, and for learning rate, we've gone over information, algorithms, experimentation, feedback, and I've given you a hack in each of those. In the course, we go much deeper into all of this, but you get the idea. And to get the most out of the coaching, you took the first step by showing up today, and I really encourage you to take advantage of these coaching calls where you're going to have a network of other people who are learning, and you're going to be able to ask any question you have that comes up. And that's, of course, taking the course is really powerful, but these calls are also inspirational for people. And it reminds you to keep investing in learning, because while we often have reminders for our urgent deadlines, we rarely have a reminder. Someone said, have you read today? Have you done something to increase your learning rate? So if you want to download today's slides, you can go here. Just gave a link. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time to be on the call. And I look forward to getting to know each of you personally. So I'm going to this formally ends the presentation part of it. I'll stick around for a few minutes if you want to ask me a question personally in the chat or in front of the whole group. So onward. So I recommend for the folks I see in here, Tony, Arn, think about what's the one thing you're going to take away from today and take action on, or what's the challenge you have right now with learning? What's your burning question? Cool. You're welcome, Vladimir. And I thrive on feedback as well. So your questions are the feedback to me of what's helpful, what was not helpful, what was confusing. Cool. We got one. There's a lot of things I could do in my learning, and you went through a lot here. What's the best place to start? Okay, Dieter, really happy you got value there. He said, thanks for a great webinar. Every slide had high value. Yeah, I really packed a lot into there, so I'm happy that came through. There's a lot of meat in here, and this stuff is really, it's simple, and it's really life transformative. So what's the low-hanging fruit? This whole presentation was a low-hanging fruit, but let me see. If I had to just narrow it down to things, one is the double time, because you have to put in the time. Just use your commute time to listen to high quality, exciting audio materials. And then to use the ha hack during it. So actually turn on your recording app when something interesting is said, and then journal it or call a friend and share what you're learning with each other. Or if you need to, pull this out of the road and email the ha hack to yourself. That's what I do as well. So if you just do that, so simple, but that gives you an extra hour per day easily of double time. And then, that alone pays for the course if you do that and then you do these journaling times, or you do it on your walks. If anybody's on Fitbit and you want to lose on a steps challenge, you can feel free to friend me. And right now I'm getting about 20,000 steps per day. And I do calls when I'm walking in the morning and the afternoon, take breaks. Got another question. Okay, Steven says, this is a really good question. We've gotten this a few times in the past. How many subjects do you limit yourself to at one time? Well, it's a hard question to answer because we're constantly learning and there's constantly learning opportunities. So for example, like every problem that shows up repeatedly in our life is a learning opportunity, or let's say you feel jealousy or anger, that's often a trigger that there's there's something deeper there to process and learn. Anytime you have a conversation with someone at a meeting, or anytime you're learning is an opportunity to practice learning. Anytime you're prioritizing your to-do list is an opportunity to practice prioritization. So rather than just rushing through and crossing something off your to-do list, you could ask yourself, okay, what are the other ways of prioritizing my day that I could use? Maybe I'll use the ICE framework. And so on a passive level, there's so many learning opportunities, and there's work and personal life and all that. So on the other hand, I think I know what you're asking. It's like, if you're deliberately learning something, what are I don't limit myself to a certain number of areas. I'm not sure it's best to have a specific number. It's often very contextual in that if I have a very specific short-term goal that I'm focused on, I'm going to devote more and more resources to that goal and learning how to achieve that goal. Where if I'm in a stage of exploration in life, I'm going to do a lot more exploration in different fields. And actually, one of the concepts we talk about in the course is landscape learning. So I will get a landscape of the different fields and the best ideas of the information there. And I'm kind of like an eagle soaring in the air. And when an eagle is really high, it can see like for miles and miles in every direction. And then it's looking for the signal and the noise. It's looking for a little movement of whatever eagles eat, like mice or bunnies or things like that. And then as soon as it sees that, it swoops down and grabs it with its claws. And so I kind of look at learning that way, that I'm kind of taking a landscape view of it. And like a lot of information, like, it's not going to be super helpful, but I'm looking for that breakthrough knowledge that could be life-changing. And then when I see that, then I go really, really deep on that. And I will do a lot of the things we talk about in the course. I'll create a research brief on it. I'll read multiple books on that topic, so I get spaced repetition. I'm going to use the ha hack over and over. So hopefully that's helpful. And the other thing with universal knowledge, you're looking at it from mental models, you start to see a lot more connections. Over time of doing this, you go from seeing knowledge as fragmented, and you see math is different from art, and science is different from science is different from business or whatever. But when you think about things in mental models or at a deeper level, you start to see how everything is connected as well. We as disciplines create these disciplinary walls, but they're not innately there. Like even after this call, I'm going to reflect on how this went, what I could have done differently. And so I'm going to basically apply the ha hack to this call and think about what went well and what didn't. And so every opportunity you teach is an opportunity to learn as well. All right. Well, great questions, everyone. If you have more questions, you can ask in the community and the Facebook group or in the group coaching call. Next one's going to be on Monday. And talk to everyone later.